Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is Joshua Lederman, here before you representing my client, Mr. Robert Ramirez. And before we get into the details of this trial, the specifics, the minutiae of this trial, let's take a moment to look at the big picture. Let's look first at who Mr. Ramirez is. Mr. Ramirez is a family man. By many standards, he is an ordinary man. He has a wife, a small son. He's a family man who is also a hard-working man. He has a steady job as a carpenter. He works in sheetrock, which, as any of you know who may work in construction or know someone who works in construction, is very physically demanding labor. It's not one for a weak or frail person who's not able to perform such labor. In addition to being a family man and a hard-working man, Mr. Ramirez is also a fun-loving man. He plays on a softball team with a couple of his friends. He plays basketball in the driveway with his son on a regular basis. He enjoys doing things physically by means of recreation with his son, with his friends. By many standards, Mr. Ramirez is simply an ordinary man. Speaking of ordinary, the night of December 6th was, by all standards, an ordinary night for Mr. Ramirez. It was a Friday night. The weekend lay ahead. After a hard week of work, he decided to go and spend some time with his friends. He came home from work earlier in the night, spent some time with his family, then left to go and spend time with his friends who happened to play on the same softball team and one of whom he worked with. The purpose of his visit with his friends was simply to watch a Bulls game and to play some cards, drink a couple of beers, have a good time with his friends. As the evening wore on, the game was over, the cards grew old, they went out on the town. They went to one bar, had a drink or two, went to another bar, had a drink or two. At this time, the evening is getting rather late. But the men had a small discussion as they left the second bar. They began discussing who was the fastest of the three. All playing on the same softball team, their discussion revolved around who could run the bases the fastest. So they decided to settle the argument once and for all. They went to Wicker Park, the park where the three men played softball. They ran a race around the diamond and then proceeded to go home. They first went back to Mr. Ramirez's friend's house, Louis. Went back to Louis's house and picked up Mr. Ramirez's car, and he drove off. Now, as he drove home, he came upon a vehicle that was moving very slowly, perhaps 5 to 10 miles an hour. It was a nondescript car, nothing special about it. The only thing that caught Mr. Ramirez's attention was the fact that it was driving very slowly. Mr. Ramirez, in a hurry to get home, the hour was late, he tried to pass the vehicle. He turned on his blinker, tried to move around to the left, the vehicle cut him off, did not let him pass. This agitated Mr. Ramirez, as I'm sure many of you who've been in a similar situation can attest. So he tried the same maneuver again. He tried to turn on his blinker, go around the vehicle would not let him pass. He then began shouting at the driver of the vehicle, saying asking why he could not pass. Why was this driver acting in such an unreasonable and unsafe manner? Well, at this point, the driver of the second vehicle stopped, and Mr. Ramirez then stopped behind him. Now, at this point, it was a critical decision. Either driver could have driven off. Either driver could have avoided what was about to happen. But they did not, and they broke no laws by not driving off. They continued to exchange words. At this point, one of the passengers of the second vehicle exited the vehicle. Mr. Ramirez also exited the vehicle upon seeing the passenger of the second car get out. They continued to exchange words, and at some point, their argument turned physical. There was a small scuffle. They scuffled along the side of the vehicles. Mr. Ramirez was knocked to the ground with the other man on top. At this point, a second person got out of the vehicle. He shouted, "Police!" Mr. Ramirez, having no idea that the two men were police officers, immediately stopped resisting and asked the identification. He began getting up off of the ground, was on his hands and knees, when he felt a sharp kick in his side. The next thing he knew, he woke up in a hospital. Because that sharp kick was not a kick at all. It was a gunshot wound. Mr. Ramirez, the fun-loving, hard-working family man, had been shot. And now all those things that were true about Mr. Ramirez were no longer true. He was still a family man, but he could no longer play basketball with his son. He was still a hard worker. He could no longer work. He missed 6 months of work and still cannot perform to the same level that he performed at work before. He was still a fun-loving man, but he could no longer play softball with his friends. You see, Mr. Ramirez's life took a drastic turn that night when he was shot by Officer Edward Waldman. So, during the next couple of days, in the course of this trial, you will hear evidence. You'll hear depositions. You'll hear ballistics evidence. You'll hear countless pieces of information, some of which will entertain you, some of which will bore you. But the real issue, Mr. Ramirez was shot. His life was drastically altered for the worse. That is the reason that at the end of this trial, I will humbly ask for a decision in favor of the plaintiff, my client, Mr. Robert Ramirez.